Hello, class. So, greetings. It is Sunday night. I know it's super late. Been sick this week. I'm very thankful that I was able to sort through the mass quantities of reading to be able to discuss the second language learning and self identity. So, let's get straight to it. In the Ada and Compoy text, what I gathered from Unit 3 was the strengthening the self identity, which piggybacks off of last week's reading in terms of building the self-esteem. So I thought there were two quotes in particular that really stood out to me just reading the introduction on page 101, which is, when we acknowledge a person's preference about what he or she likes to be called, we are honoring that person's individuality. It's completely true. My name is Andrea, but I prefer to be called Andy. I've always preferred to be called Andy, unless you're somebody from student loans or somebody I don't know. Anybody calls me Andy, and that's just what I prefer to be called. And I think it's super important that we acknowledge that with our students, and we do that, and we do go that extra step to call them something that they prefer, as well as learning to pronounce somebody's name properly in a simple way. It just shows respect. When I'm teaching, because I teach VPK3 and I'm teaching the children their first, middle, and last name, I always make sure to confirm with their parents that I'm teaching them the correct pronunciation. It's super important. It's just little things like that that are super respectful. You're being respectful of somebody's culture. You're being respectful of a name that might be handed down from somebody else. You're just being respectful in general. And I'm so sorry if the glare on my glasses is super distracting, but I cannot see my notes without them. But also, I thought the activity of having a child read a book where a character's relationship with their name is very prominent is really important, because children need to learn that their name is their ownership. That is part of their identity. That's how they mark things. I tell the kids all the time, you have to write your name on your stuff. How do I know it's yours? How do I know this is a product of you? And I think also being respectful of, again, what they want to be called, again, of their name is super important. I had a friend at school who, her name was Lee Ann. Lee was her first name, Ann was her middle name, and the teacher only called her Lee, and it bothered her to no end. She's like, I'm Lee Ann. She's like, no, that's not your real name. And I thought that was very disrespectful of a teacher to do to somebody. Clearly, a child is saying, this is what I want to be called, and you're just not doing that. And for kind of selfish reasons, to be completely honest. I also like the idea of the activity of how did you get your name or history with older children. It wouldn't be plausible with my group of kids, but I think that would be an awesome activity, such as my name came from my mom babysat a little girl and she just liked the name, and that was it. Her nickname was actually Andy, and she only went by Andy, so I don't know why they bothered with Andrea, but that's beside the point. So I love the idea of class dialogues about diversity. I think it's really important that we talk about, when introducing, for instance, when I'm telling the children, okay, this is your last name. They're learning their last name for the first time, and I'll explain to them it's because maybe your mommy and daddy are from such and such country, and it's a very special name, and it might be hard to pronounce right now, but it's going to be super important when you get older. And there's a teacher in the classroom next door to me that she takes all the children's names, she makes a name book. So for each letter of the alphabet, which is going into Unit 4, the idea of an alphabet book, an ABC book, for every letter, she'll put everybody's name who has that letter. So it's bringing a commonality to all of our names in a way that a 3-year-old can understand that these names are really special and they're really important, but we're all complex social beings, which brings us to Unit 4, that through language we transmit history and culture. And I think also with being social beings, I think the idea of students learning from one another is so important. I love when there's moments in the classroom where a child doesn't know how to do something and another child volunteers straight away, I can do this, I can help. And I'll step back and I will let that child take over, because I think it's important to not only help this one child learn from somebody their own age, but also to reinforce that skill another child has already learned by boosting their self-esteem and teaching somebody else. So I think the ABC book, again, is a wonderful idea for children to express individuality and culture, like the pictures that were done on 126. It's just unrealistic for my 3-year-olds. other than maybe the name book. But I did think on 129 where it talks about community, I thought the idea of maybe, because I work at a Jewish school, the idea of maybe doing like a faith-based ABC book and maybe talking about like I is for Israel and doing maybe a picture idea book with the alphabet. I think it was all food for thought. Moving on to Tabor chapter 4, which piggybacks off of, again, last week's, because last week we focused on the concept of 1 and 2 when it comes to second language learning for young children. This one talks about the second 2 periods on page 37, that children begin to go public using individual words and phrases in their new language, as well as children beginning to develop productive use of the second language, communicating with phrases and sentences that they construct them on, and so on. I'm sure everybody read the text and read the same 2 sentences. But if we fast forward a little bit to page 55, then, because that was from 37, that was from the last chapter. Those are descriptions I just wanted to recap. But then we move forward and we go to page 55 and we talk about the 2 different types of speech that are used when learners are starting to use their new speech in accordance with period 3. So, for instance, telegraphic speech, which I'm sure everybody read the long, extensive definition for, which I won't do it again. But identifying objects in English, the simple process of what's this, what's that, what's this, what's that, and starting to learn individual things, which at the bare minimum, when learning a new language, it is important to know just if you could just point at this one thing and try to say that word, you're starting to build a vocabulary. You're starting to build confidence in yourself. You're starting with the ABC book, one word at a time, starting to build a construct for how you're going to form sentences. And you're getting confident in yourself. And that goes back into Unit 3 in the ADA book, and that goes into Unit 4 when we're talking about just basic social concepts that all bind us together. So there's formulatic speech as well, which is using chunks of phrases we already know in play. So having a child in my classroom who is not as comfortable in English, they're still learning, or my child who is learning verbal English in comparison to sign language, who they like to play a game of pretend to be Miss Andy, and they'll ask, "Are you okay?" "I'm okay." "Are you proud of yourself?" Because anytime a child accomplishes something that they didn't think they'd accomplished, my first question is always, "Are you proud of yourself?" And hearing them use those verbiage. Now, the productive language I thought was interesting because it's taking basically the telegraphic speech as well as the formulaic speech, and it's combining the 2. You're taking words that you're confident in identifying things, but you're also basically using it in a sentence from formulated pieces of chunks and phrases and kind of combining it to construct your own brand new sentence. And that's really the new step that says they're really starting to get it. They're really starting to be confident in themselves. So I thought the whole chapter had a lot of good examples, a lot of serious reading, but in all, it did remind me of just interactions I've had with kids over the years that I know that it's annoying to be mimicked, but in a way I know it's a learning tool, and I know that it is helping them throughout the time, and they're taking that of maybe what they've heard me say and words they've heard in the classroom, and they're starting to build their own speech. So it was just a nice little reminder of just how important it is and really how difficult learning a second language is. I mean, it's hard enough for an adult. I mean, I know it's easier in theory for a child, but it must be very confusing as well. Moving on to the assortment of learning styles, when it comes to the visual, auditory, kinesthetic, I'm sorry, it's kind of late, model and virtual learning styles. I went through all the different learning styles, and to me, the one I use in my classroom is this because I have children that learn from different ways. I have the child who needs to physically see what the end product is. I have a child who has to hear the directions, and I have a child who has to see every step of the way or has to see other people do it. There's so many different types of learning styles, and I think that it's extremely important that when I create my group lesson plans, my small group lesson plans, that I hit upon each one of those ideas for each different learning styles of my group. And also, fast forward to the last major reading, I was stuck on the Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences because I see this on a daily basis where I know I talk about my kids way too much, I'm sorry. Where you have the child who maybe can't do X, Y, or Z, but excels at Z, and you don't know why. And I think it's interesting, the idea of spatial awareness. I don't think that that is hit upon as a serious intelligence. And I think that's underwhelmed, and it should be, because spatial awareness is so important, especially in early childhood development. And the idea that I know is focused solely on ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, but I think spatial awareness is very underwhelmed, as well as impulse control, or as well as just any sort of fine motor activity. It's just kind of underwhelmed in the thought of multiple ways to be intelligent, that there's more than just one generalized way to be intelligent. So that's a really long video, and I'm sorry you had to see my awfully messy hair at this late in the evening, but I'm glad I was able to get through all the readings. I hope that everybody had a good week and has a good week coming up. So, good night.